like cashier. Get the money like a cashier. Customer, clientele. I was broke, they were last.
Hey, hello, and welcome. Yes, it got cut off because Kevin's not here, and he didn't, put the stuff up. So anyway, welcome to Dope Black Thoughts. My name is Marcus Ivy. Welcome.
I'm Stefania.
Mike Carter, a.k.a. the Paperboy, and we have another special guest.
Another special guest today. Let me just bring him on in. And Mr. Carter, please introduce us.
This would be Mr. Nick Sarwark. You might know him from his special guest appearance in 2016. Were you the director of the Libertarian Party? What was your?
I was the chairman. I was the guy.
Yeah.
And as he slowly moved up, you ran for mayor of Phoenix, I believe.
I didn't win.
I'll get to that. And you're also, did you just run for district attorney in another jurisdiction?
Yes, Hillsborough County, New Hampshire. I ran for the county attorney, which is the district attorney equivalent out here.
Oh, okay.
The reason that I know Mr. Sarwark is that
same here. I know it for the same reason too.
He was public defender in the 18th Judicial District based out of Arapahoe County. Were you under Carroll? Was Carroll gone by the time you got there?
I was in right at the end of Carroll and was told nobody can be worse than Carroll. Once Carroll's gone, whoever comes after her's got to be better. There's nothing possibly worse.
And
then something else happened. The fighting 18th got fighting her.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Well, now,
he's out now, though, right? Is he gone?
Yes, he is. I don't know if you worked with John Kellner. He is now the district attorney. Yes, he's now the district attorney out in the 18th. So, nice. Your boy is.
Is he done?
No, he's on payroll still as a district attorney, an assistant district attorney.
He's biding his time to run because in 3 years or 3.5 years, the districts will split, and so Douglas and Arapahoe County will separate. So it'll be Douglas, Elbert, Lincoln. So he's going to probably run down there.
I feel like he's the right fit for Douglas Elbert Lincoln.
Yeah,
unfortunately, as a former Douglas County resident, it didn't always match my values.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you were still here, you'd be. Well, then I want to talk to you about that too, because you can have that 3,000-foot view of Arapahoe County politics. And just the ridiculousness of it, and you being a lawyer. We haven't had any public defenders on. I'm kind of surprised about that. We haven't had any public defenders on.
That is interesting, isn't it?
But you were a lawyer in that office. I'd love to hear your comments from a 3,000-foot view of what you thought about Colorado politics from back then, and what are you seeing right now?
Before you start. Are you no longer a public defender? Are you no longer practicing?
No, I've moved on and moved on and moved on. So I left Colorado back in 2014. I got elected chairman of the national committee, which having a political job is not necessarily conducive to having a state job. And so Jimmo and I had a talk, and it was time to move on. So I moved down to Phoenix and ran the family car dealership for about 5 years. That was how I got looped into Phoenix politics. You know, my family had been in Phoenix since the 40s. Mayor came up for office. You know, it kind of dovetailed. And then in 2019, we moved out here to New Hampshire. And so now I just actually got admitted to New Hampshire on motion. So I'm going to go back into doing a little more law, but I've done, business stuff and computer stuff before law school. And so, the whole experience of being in Arapahoe County, when I got picked up as a public defender, that was like the scariest place you could go. but that was also the best place you could go.
Right.
Because it was the scariest place you could go. It's like, hey, this is where hell is. If you live, you're going to be really good at this. And so it was pretty wild.
And one of the things that we've been dealing with is, I believe we're having Mr. Weissman on.
Yep. Right after.
We've been talking about two things. We're talking about felony murder and habitual counts. As a public defender back in the 18th, tell us about what a habitual count is and was, and how it affected being in the 18th back then.
So there's two kinds of bitches in the Colorado statute, at least as I recall. There's a little bitch and there's the big bitch.
Clutch my pearls, clutch my pearls.
So little bitch is, I believe, 3 times the max, and then big bitch takes you up to 4 times the max. And actually, in my 5 years as a public defender, like 36 trials to a jury, multiple first-degree murder cases, the guy I have in the longest was a big bitch armed robbery. It was an ag rob, and it was the stupidest case. Like, dude took a phone from a guy on a bus and got off the bus, and then the other guy got off the bus and like, give me my phone back, and he pulled the knife and was like, you know, I'll cut you or whatever. And that was the whole thing. That was the whole thing. That was everything, right? That was the whole thing. He ended up not taking the deal, which still kills me. Like, you know, because I never really pushed deals on people. But we had 12. We had 12.
Oh, wow.
And it was 12 stipulated. And I think it might have been nonviolent time, but it was still 12. And he went to trial, testified, and we even got a proportionality review, which you never get. And that killed me. Like, it kills you when you get the review, you get the hearing, you put all the evidence up there. You've got the, you know, this is disproportionate. This isn't right. And then the judge, you know, does the like walk around, tells you how great an attorney you are, which is always the kiss of death. You're excellent. You're such a good advocate, Mr. Sarwark. Your client is so lucky to have you. And it's like,
well, then you know it's coming.
Yeah. So, he took 48 years, which it's a crime of violence. So he's going to do a hard 36. Gets out maybe in his 60s over like some stupid stuff. And they were hitting those all the time. It was always, we're going to hit you with the habitual if you have 2 prior felonies or 3 prior felonies. That was the thing. And it just, you know, that was why when we were trained, it was always, you never give somebody their first felony.
Right.
If you can help it, you get them a misdemeanor, you get them a deferred judgment. You just don't give them that first felony, because that starts this downhill spiral where there's not a good way out of there, right? Like, it just, oh, well, you got a prior felony, so now you got to go down for longer. And, oh, you got 2 prior felonies, well, now you're habitual. And it's like that person's life is thrown away, and that's the kind of shit. It's not right. Right? Like the way we throw away human life in this country, you know, are we that affluent that, you know, just like, hey, human beings who have, you know, a whole life in front of them, just toss them in a box because we've got too many. So, you know, let's pay some people to lock them in cages. It just doesn't make any sense.
I remember I had a sentencing, and it was a habitual sentencing after trial, and I think the lower age was like 108. But it was. I just remember getting the professionality of you doing the mitigation and just kind of getting to a point where I'm talking to the judge and I go, Your Honor, what do they call it? The cornerstone on this building, right? The cornerstone it has like 1999 on it or something, right? The concept of giving somebody 108 years in a building that's been around for 10 years in a county, or in a county that's been around for 50, in a state that's barely been around for 100. The concept of us coming together as society giving somebody 100 years, and our country's barely 200 years old.
Well, and it's coming back to bite us because it's easy. And I hate to say this, that it shouldn't be easy. Like, none of this should be easy. But judges get to the point where it's easy to hand down decades like they're candy, right? At a sentencing, they can all be very solemn about it. And, you know, there's laws and blah, 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 blah. But still, so-and-so, you get to get sentenced to the Department of Corrections for 47 years. That's easy to say. But 47 years of care and feeding as somebody gets older and more geriatric, and they're not part of the rest of society for that long, that's not worth it. There's nothing worth it to us as a society to take somebody out of humanity for that long. It doesn't make any sense outside of maybe the most egregious, you know, mass murderer person where you just have to take that person a little bit away from the rest of us. But still, that should be so rare. And instead it's like, boom, 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 you just knock people away. And it's the biggest problem I've had with, you know, that amendment process is the 13th Amendment has this giant loophole in it that lets you have Angola prison camp, right? Where, hey, if we just hit you with a felony, now you get to be a slave again. There's something wrong with, we just have not evolved enough as a society. We have to get past, we incarcerate more people in this country than any other modern industrial country that's not China.
Right.
And when I studied criminal law in law school, my professor explained to me, you know, you go to Europe, you go to Germany, people don't get years there. They get fines, they get restorative justice, they get all these things that make the other person whole, but they don't just get their life taken away. That's a very American thing. And it comes from, you know, it's weird. We just have too many people and too much stuff going on here. It's like we have to have a place to go lock some people up just so that there aren't too many people out here. So, you know, make some crimes and those people have to go into the box, and it's just messed up. It's a messed up society we live in.
Go ahead, Stefania.
How did you feel having to fight against the district attorneys in out here in 18 when you were a public defender? Did you feel like they were being fair or really just being vicious about the way they were getting justice?
So the problem is too many of them aren't really interested in justice. They're there to make some sort of name for themselves, either as a line deputy, they want to make a career, or if you're elected DA, you want to make, you know, I'm tough on crime. And it wasn't even so much that they were mean about it. It was just they lost sense of proportionality, right? You'd get these very baby DAs who would come into misdemeanor court and they would treat very low-level domestic violence offenses like it was the end of the world, you know, and your client has to take 2 years in jail for this because I can't believe he would hit his wife. And it got out of proportion, and there's this, you get jaded to it, right? It's not even that they're mean, right? There were a few, I know a couple of mean DAs in the 18th, but there weren't that many. For the most part, it was just like, that was just their job. Like, my job is to throw people in cages. That's my job.
Okay, that's it. When you lose sense of, when you do that and you don't even look back at the life that you're thrown in a cage, like you said, you lose all sense of proportionality, then it becomes vicious. That's how it seems to the public and the layman. You know what I mean? When we see that, well, you know, we've been talking about felony murder has been in our conversations a lot lately, because we've just changed our felony murder law here, thank God. So when we see felony murder being used in, I quote Brockler as saying, We need it. This is a tool that we need to have in our toolbox, which means they're using it like a weapon. It's like a loaded gun for a district attorney. And so they use it as a weapon. And when they use that, they don't care about the life that they're abusing with this weapon.
So that idea of tools in the toolbox is really important for how we analyze any kind of policy, criminal justice or anything else. Is if you have the tool in the toolbox, you're going to use it, right? The reason that we get involved as a country in so many foreign entanglements is we have companies that make missiles and bombs and warheads that need to be blown up, because if you don't blow them up, then you have too many and you can't buy more. And there are companies that make those that really like to sell you more. So you got to use up what you got. So every so often it's like, hey, there's a pharmaceutical factory in Syria that probably needs to blow up, because why not? And that's how the whole kind of prison industrial complex works too, is you've got this level of criminal justice system that's there that needs a certain amount of inputs into it, right? This is the level of criminality. I mean, Carter, I know you and I were around at the same time when they defelonized a lot of the possessory offenses in Colorado. And that froze the public defender's budget and the DA's budget, I think, for 2 straight fiscal years, because there was such a reduction in how much money you had to spend on the criminal justice system when you stopped trying to lock people into prison for possessing drugs, right? Like, it took out this huge chunk of people from the system when it was just misdemeanors. And that kind of shift, we have to acknowledge that there's a whole system built around caging other people. And we have to find something else for those people to do, for the guards to do, for all these extra DAs that we're not going to need to do, for like probably too many cops for what we need done. I mean, the pandemic has kept a lot of people inside, and police staffing isn't going down. But it probably could, because really, what are people doing?
Right.
Like, do you need that many cops? Do you really? Like, are there other jobs that could be done? Useful ones?
So you hit, no, go ahead, Stefan, you go ahead.
No, I was just saying, good point.
So I guess why I'm interested to hear your thoughts on what is the platform? What is the stance from the Libertarian Party as it relates to, and I hate to use the term criminal justice, because whose definition of justice are we talking about? But what is your stand? What is the stance of the Libertarian Party with respect to criminal reform / justice? Where's that at?
Basically, the Libertarian Party's perspective is that if you don't have a victim, you don't have a crime. For 9 times out of 10, that sort of solves the whole problem. So your traditional vice offenses, drug possession, consensual sex work.
Vice as in like prostitution, John?
Yes.
Things of that nature? Okay.
Consensual sex work, consensual drug use or sale amongst adults, any sort of, I'm going to hurt myself, if I don't wear a seatbelt or I don't wear a motorcycle helmet, all of those kind of offenses in a libertarian society would not be criminal offenses. They're just not, it's not the appropriate place for the state to potentially take away your liberty for something you're doing to yourself, right? If you want to exchange money with someone else for their service, and their service happens to be sexual, really, where does the state come into that? I don't even see why they would be involved, right? Someone wants to trade their labor for your money. Where's the government in all this? And, like, hey, baby, we've got a good thing going. Let's get a threesome here with the government. It doesn't make any sense. And those kind of offenses, traditionally, if you look at Nixon and the war on drugs, they create offenses that loosely correlate with whatever group that they would like to suppress in society. And so that's where you get this sort of socioeconomic correlation, where when Nixon started the war on drugs, it was like, we can't really go after black people because that's illegal under the First Amendment, but they all use weed, so we can go after weed. And now, hey, look, we're arresting all the black people and the hippies. It all works out, right? But now they've committed a crime. And so, we're not trying to persecute them. They're just criminals. But it's a crime we made up, right? We just made up that crime. We're like, hey, today it's a crime now to smoke the weed. It didn't used to be, but now it is. And so now you have to go to prison because you smoked the weed. That's the crime.
So let me, and I'll pass this off next. So then what kind of district attorney would you have been? So you said you ran. So did you, is the race over? Are you still in the process?
The race is over. I didn't win that race either. I've got 2 races under my belt. I mean, I'd only lived here for about a year and I had 6%, which wasn't bad. It was the highest for a libertarian in New Hampshire. But my platform was basically taking that holistic view of criminal justice that you get from having been on the other side of it and been a business owner and kind of seen the whole, 360 of what this system is about. And the things that are important to people here and probably, still in Colorado. I haven't lived there in a few years, but it used to be that basically you didn't want somebody to steal your kid's bike or potentially mug or rape your daughter when she's going to school. That's what you wanted the cops and the district attorney to focus on, is property and violent crime. And you didn't really care about all this other goofy stuff that would get like federal funds for some sort of armored personnel carrier that, the SWAT team uses to go bust drug dealers. That doesn't make any sense. Like, you didn't care about that. You cared about hey, nobody should break into my house when I'm at work, right? Like, go find the burglars. Don't bother me with people that have weed. And that was going to be the platform I was running on, was to kind of work with the cops and the other law enforcement agencies here in Hillsborough County to prioritize violent and property crime, to keep the quality of life here, what brings people to New Hampshire. Like, I think this might be the safest state in the entire country. And everybody's got guns. Like, there's tons of guns, but nobody really does anything bad here. And it's just kind of that live and let live, relatively liberal, well-educated, we'll shoot you if you come into our house, but don't come into our house kind of place. Like, it is what it is. It is, right. But it's very similar to Colorado. Colorado was that same kind of like, people really didn't get into your business and you didn't get into their business, and everybody kind of did their own thing. And, not that many people got mugged because a lot of people carried, and it tended to make people be a little more cautious.
Oh, so that's interesting, because that argument is analogous to our previous guest who was on this past Thursday. Everyone go watch that. It was explosive. Hashim went off, and Carter was enjoying it too much. But anyway, that's interesting, because that was her argument. Her argument essentially was, if everybody has a gun, nobody's going to cause any issues because everybody's strapped.
It does tend to make people be a little more cautious, right? It's the same sort of thing that you see with people on the internet. Like, people on social media will say all sorts of stuff that they wouldn't say if they were with you in a bar.
Right.
Like, they wouldn't even start to say stuff like that. But because they're far away from you, they're like, I can say whatever I want. You can't hit me. It's that same kind of thing. If you go out and you're like, hey, there's probably a few people who are carrying here, you're not going to start things unless you really need to start something. And so it keeps everybody at this background level of, try to be cool most of the time.
Wow.
Interesting.
I like that. Yeah. I like that. I have a question. No, I like that. But when did you run for mayor of, was it Phoenix?
It was Phoenix. Phoenix was 2018.
Okay, and you got a pretty sizable chunk. You got like 10% of the vote.
10.5. So. Yes, he did. 10.5% of the vote.
Talk to me about, because Phoenix has been Arizona has been in the news. It shift to being blue, but you have an insight into what happened in Arizona in 2020 and what you saw happening in 2018, where a libertarian got 10% of the vote in a mayoral race.
Yeah, so like that's the thread that runs through the entire Mountain West is, in our analysis nationally as a party, the Mountain West is kind of the most libertarian area of the country. And what it really comes down to is there's this live and let live, very progressive, we really don't care what you do with your own life, just don't get in our way. But it adds in, some of the gun culture and the free speech culture and, people just doing their own thing, that it transcends the Republican Democrat deal, right? And that's what I saw in the 2018 election. And that's with the shift back. Kirsten Sinema is the senator from Arizona now, and she's a Democrat, but she's like not the same as like they're different a little bit. She's so different from what you would put as, like a traditional Democrat, but she wouldn't fit in with the Republican Party in Arizona either.
She's very conservative. Yeah.
Right. And so it's like she's into the guns, but also the unions. She's, pro-choice, but she's also like pro-cannabis legalization. And she's riding that line. And that's where the real middle is in Arizona politics. And I think in Colorado politics, that's where you see like a Hickenlooper and a Polis. If you can straddle that divide and not make some of those pointy edges, you just rub them off, right? Like the Republicans on the abortion or the Democrats on the gun control, just take those little pieces and rub them off, sand them off. And then it's not so pokey. And then everyone's like, oh, I like you. Like you're pro-choice, but also I can carry a gun and you're not mad at me. And so that's good. You're good. I'm good. We're all good.
That's
right? That middle ground is wide open for people who are willing to live in a pluralistic society, right? Where it's like, you don't have to live your life the way I live my life. There's space for you. There's space for me. We'll talk it out over a beer, but I'm not going to come back to your house and be like, all right, start studying your Bible verses because that's what we're all doing now. You're like, it's not for me. That's for you. We do my own thing in my house. That kind of way of being provides kind of like the laboratories of democracy that are federalism. You bring that down to the household level, and each one of us gets to have our own way of trying to live the best life we can. And as long as we have the most space possible for that, we have the most possibilities for people to either screw it up or do really well at it. And then you follow the people that do really well at it. Don't follow the ones that screw it up. That's a rookie mistake. I wouldn't recommend it.
Well, but it seems like we're kind of, I like what you call it rubbing off the edges and kind of heading towards the middle.
Yeah.
Explain to me, if you can, our Congresswoman Bobart. I mean, from the 3,000.
Yes.
There it is.
Essential oils, man.
Yeah.
That stuff goes right to your brain. A little too much doTERRA, poof. You never know.
But
she's one of the ones that are in the rabbit hole, though, that you try and pull back.
Yeah.
Earlier.
So the thing with people like that is, this is a deep dive. So basically, there are people that need there to be meaning in the world, and they need their life to mean something. And their life's supposed to mean something because their parents' life meant something, but they're not feeling like there's a meaning for them, right? They're not doing well. They didn't get a college degree, whatever it is. They're just not feeling the meaning. So they need something to mean something. And that was where the populist thing from the last president came from, was this idea of providing meaning to these people who don't have it. And the meaning was we're going to fight back against all the people that screwed up America. We're going to go back to where it was when it was great, which was when your parents were alive and they had meaningful lives. We'll just go back to that. You'll have a meaningful life too. That was the promise, because there are a lot of people that are just in the middle of the country going, man, I don't know. How do you deal with all this stuff that's changing? Like, I don't know. And they want that meaning so badly that they're willing to take that meaning from a very negative place, where the meaning is that Bill Gates and shadowy pharmaceutical companies want to put a microchip in my arm. And so they made this whole COVID thing to be able to put a microchip in my arm because that's what they want. They want me. They want to track me because that is a worldview that has me being at the center of it. I'm very important because Bill Gates wants to track me with a microchip, and the pharmaceutical companies, they just want me to take that vaccine. And if I stand up and I'm like, I'm not taking the vaccine, I'm going to show them how important I am because I'm going to deny them the ability to microchip me because I'm what it's all about. The way out of that is to basically be like, dude, don't get the vaccine if you don't want it, man. Like, there's not enough for everybody. Like, we're good. That's it. Right? And then you just sort of like keep going on your own thing. Like, I got mine. You guys have gotten yours. Well, get ours. And then we're like, yeah, well, that's the guy who still does the thing because he's really into that. We're hoping he'll come around soon. But you can't really push him out of it, right? Because if you go fight him about it, then he's like, that's what they said was going to happen. Bill Gates was going to send all of the people with their propaganda to convince me, in order to convince me to get the microchip. So when you tell me that I'm crazy, that's just proof that I'm not crazy. Because you guys are fighting me, because that's what Bill Gates wants.
That's the argument. That's the argument. It's a big circular, nonsensical argument. That's what it is, though.
But it's a closed system. You can't get into it. Because as soon as you say, like, hey, that's stupid, they're like, proof that I'm right. Because you said I was dumb.
So like, why is this popular with people like Boebert and let's go Marjorie Taylor Greene,
because it makes them meaningful. It means they matter. When in fact, the people who are the kind of core base for the Trump populism are the people who are no longer really relevant in our new economy, right? Mm-hmm. They tend to be the people who are in some of these manufacturing jobs that are going away. They aren't highly educated, so they're not, in line for some of this new stuff, and they feel kind of displaced. And so this makes them feel important, even if they're feeling important for being hated, right? They would rather take the social opprobrium that you get if you're into like QAnon and Marjorie Taylor Greene. They would rather take those attacks because that proves that they matter enough to be attacked, right? So it feeds into something for them. They're getting something out of it. And the only way you can really get these people, and I've dealt with them a few times over the last, being chair of a national political party gives you a really unique set of experiences. You have to take the oxygen away from them, right? You can't go and fight them head on. You just have to say stuff like, hey, that's really interesting what you're saying about how these vaccines are more dangerous than the disease. I'm always looking for good evidence for new things. Can you share what study that you're relying on? Because I'm looking for new stuff too, to find out how to live my life. And you just ask them questions about numbers and like, who do you trust and what are your sources? I know you've told me the CDC sources, they're wrong, of course. Yeah, we know, because the government, right? Right. But who do you trust? Right. Like, what are the numbers you trust? And then you find that like there's not a lot there. No. Because what they say is, well, there's really no numbers that you can really trust. Like,
because you can't trust the news.
You can't trust anyone.
We literally had this conversation.
And then you're nihilist, right? And it's like the Big Lebowski. Say what you will about the tenets of National Socialism. At least it's an ethos, Donnie. Right. You can't be a nihilist and not believe in anything. Then you got ferrets in the bathtub and nothing makes sense.
What I'll say is I love, like I said, because Nick is still out there in the public eye, I love going on his Facebook page and just posting random stuff to see if I can get the natives restless, because they have no clue who I am. It's just under
The part where you were trusting the cops the other day, I was like, wait a second.
Just to see if I can provoke the natives to see what they will do. Like, this guy's an idiot. Wow, like, what do you mean?
Now I'm gonna have to go check out your page. What did
it's awesome.
say?
Because and it's that whole anonymous, because then I can go out there and I can some of it's interesting, some of it's very interesting.
They all came at you. They're like, what are you doing trusting the cops, Carter? This doesn't make any sense.
Who is this guy?
Qualified immunity. You're crazy, man.
Some Trump guys on your page. I was enjoying myself, but what I would say is that whole, what is it, a myopic view of the world. Like, it is all about me. And
right.
My question, though, and I don't know if I ever told you this. I was at the University of New Mexico when Governor Johnson.
You were Lobo.
Yeah, I'm a Lobo. Woof, woof, woof. And I was with Governor Johnson. Hey,
I thought that was the horn. Okay.
No. Longhorns, Lobos. Right. That'll be enough of that. I knew Governor Johnson when he was a member of the Land of Enchantment.
Yeah.
Talk to us about running him as the campaign.
Yeah.
He got votes.
He got votes.
Mm-hmm.
He's cool. My wife and I have a picture in our bedroom of like me and her and Gary at the National Convention banquet because he was nominated the second time under my watch. So there are some perks to this job, not very many. Doesn't pay anything. No, he's a great guy. He is the most honest and unassuming, just straight ahead entrepreneur, salt of the earth, like does not have a dishonest bone in his body. And that hurt him, right? Because he's so genuine. He would tell you what he thought. Like he wouldn't even think the politician like, well, I should figure out what they want to hear. He's like, no, that's dumb. Don't do that. That's stupid. And people are like, you can't say that. You're a governor. You're not allowed to like, but it's dumb. and that resonated with people, I thought.
Well, and there was two things he did because I was also I was on a staff of one of the state senators that hated him.
He wasn't popular with everybody.
But two things he did. He started the Amigo Scholarship Fund, and we were laughing about this. At a certain point, New Mexico higher education was free. Mm-hmm. There was a scholarship in which if you graduated from high school and the state of New Mexico, you got to go to a college for free.
Oh, in New Mexico.
And it's a New Mexico college, so but still okay.
I mean, come on.
Like almost like American college, very similar.
And this is back in 99, 2000, legalized marijuana.
Oh yeah.
This is 20 years ago.
And it didn't because that was what made him and Bill Weld like so cool as a ticket. And they were definitely a very odd couple, right? Like little New Mexico entrepreneur, handyman dude, Boston Brahmin, tall, redheaded, like born with 3 silver spoons in his mouth and like an extra that he keeps out back that comes over, across the transatlantic. But they both were way ahead of their time in the 90s, like Governor Johnson on weed, and Bill Weld was like for gay marriage back in 92, 93. Like as a Republican in Massachusetts, that's why he didn't get the ambassadorship to Mexico. Strom Thurmond was like, no, you can't be for gay marriage and be an ambassador. And he spiked his nomination. He was supposed to get the ambassadorship under President Clinton. So because they were too ahead of their time. But it was the same kind of deal where it was like, these are common sense guys who are like, this doesn't make any sense for us to spend money and laws on what people smoke or who they choose to love. Like that's just not worth anyone's time or money or effort. And they couldn't get why the rest of society hadn't caught up with that. Like hey, maybe we shouldn't pay cops to go deal with who's sleeping with who, or, you know, who's smoking what. Like, maybe that's not a great use of all of our money.
So interesting. Yeah.
Maybe.
Actually good.
Next part. Go ahead. I got the next question.
Well, go ahead, because I wanted to flip up a little bit, because the Libertarian platform, most people don't know what it is, and you gave us a little bit of rendition on it. So here's the thing. I know many folks who think libertarians are just another version of Republicans, but you know, it's interesting because you all have some things that align with the left, and you have things that align with the right, and you have things that are completely just, you know, you all's mindset. So for instance, as you know, in Colorado, we've eliminated the death penalty here in the state of Colorado, which is great. Libertarians don't believe in the death penalty, isn't that correct?
We don't. That was the last platform plank I got put in the national platform. I think it was either the 16 or the 18 convention. I got death penalty abolition put into the platform. I was actually trying to get Doug Wilson, my former boss, to come and speak at that convention, and scheduled didn't allow. But no, I mean, the idea, libertarians generally feel like the government doesn't do a lot of stuff well. You know, what it does poorly. And if you don't want them to be running like the driver's license thing and the roads and stuff, do you really want them killing people? I think not. I don't think that's a great idea, right? And so it's a practical thing, and that's sort of where, you know, the party is officially pro-choice, but it's the only party where you have this nuanced view of, if you believe abortion is murder, you probably shouldn't pay to have other people do abortions. And if you believe abortion is like your right as a woman, you probably shouldn't pay to like stop people from having abortions. So let's just get government out of the abortion thing, completely. Period, full stop. And y'all do your crisis pregnancy centers and your lobbying, and, you know, you give money to Planned Parenthood if that's what you're into, but you take government out of it, right? Because it's just too messed up of an issue. And it's like, you know, you've got the father and the mother and the doctor and the government, and one of these things is not like the others. One of these things does not belong, right? Like, the government doesn't have any business in that decision. That's not really for the government. That's really a tough decision for the potential parents and their physician to have. How is the government helping at all to even be involved in that? And that's a more nuanced position than like the hard pro-choice or the hard pro-life of either the Democratic or the Republican Party, right? This is a lot more of a, you know, I may think abortion is murder, but I also know what it would take to go and try and track down everyone who might have had an abortion, right? That kind of police state, that's not worth it. That's just not worth it.
So then tell us this. There are so many disenfranchised millennial voters out there that you could be courting. That's number one. And number two, how do you court the black vote? What does the Libertarian Party mean for the African American?
You know, what I think it really means is it's a party that's really about that individual empowerment, which is what Trump sort of tried to tap into in the reelect, was this idea of like opening up a culture of entrepreneurship so that there aren't really these barriers to building up a community, to building up economic power centers like had traditionally been done. It was not real with the Trump thing, right? It wasn't really what they were selling, because he was still kind of selling things out the back door to his particular donors, because he's corrupt. Because he is
corrupt.
About individual empowerment and entrepreneurship, and not being about big business, right? That's the thing that sort of bothers me, is that the Libertarian Party always gets connected with the Koch brothers, which is not to say that the Kochs are bad people or whatever, but they haven't really been involved in the Libertarian Party since the early 80s. And totally walked away. we're not about big business. We're about individuals being empowered to live their lives the way they choose, to pursue happiness the way they choose, as long as they don't hurt other people and they don't take their stuff. Like, those are the two big rules. Don't hurt anybody and don't take their stuff. And if you follow those rules, then, you know, let your freak flag fly, live your life however you want, you know, build a business, go start an art commune, do whatever you like, is don't hurt people, don't take their stuff. And I think that that stripping away of a lot of just the BS that is the current system, that the Democrats and the Republicans are both kind of tied into it, right? Like, if you're tied into how the system works, and we'll just take criminal justice, you've got a probation office, you've got the district attorney, you've got the judges, you've got the sheriff, you've got the various cop shops, you've got the defense bar, you've got bail bondsmen, which cash bail is starting to go away with people like Chase Boudin out in San Francisco, who actually gave me a lot of really good advice for my campaign. I mean, not enough to win, but some good advice. Just stripping off all of that stuff, that there's a lot of people who are invested in it, right? That's why it's hard to get ahead as a libertarian. It's not because our ideas don't make sense. They make tons of sense. It's people just get so locked into the old system, they can't break out of it. It's like, how many of you have talked about getting off of Facebook, right? Like, Facebook sucks. I'm tired of Facebook. I'm tired of the echo chamber. Zuckerberg, I got banned for saying something I shouldn't say, blah, 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 blah. But you don't leave because everyone's locked into it, and so nobody leaves. And that's how this system of bad government that the Republicans and Democrats do this musical chairs back and forth, like switch the pendulum, people get something out of it. In as screwed up a way as that is, there's something they get out of it. You know what I mean? Like,
no.
Like,
you have a great, the libertarian message, portions of it, that's a great message, right? Like, it is very seductive, and I guess by virtue of 2016, a lot of people were on board with it, right? Mm-hmm. I think, was it 3 or 4%?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like 3.5.
Would you say, do you believe that had an effect on Hillary losing to Trump? And do you take any responsibility for that?
Not really. I mean, the libertarian vote moves around because the libertarian vote is really about people that don't want the existing status quo more than anything else, right? That's where it really aligns, is this all sucks. Your system sucks. We've determined your whole system sucks. You know, it's the Rage Against the Machine thing. And so the split in the libertarian vote in 2016 mostly was either people that went to Trump because he looked like the craziest son of a bitch in the room, or people that went Gary Johnson because they're like, no, this all sucks, and just let's have an entrepreneurial governor. And similarly, in 2020, you had half the libertarian vote kind of went to Biden for the let's get rid of the craziest son of a bitch in the room.
Like, oops.
We're done with that. And then the other half went with Joe Jorgensen because they're still like, no, they both suck, and this still really sucks, and we just want to vote libertarian. But you're seeing bigger and bigger chunks of we just want to vote libertarian, right? Like, going back and forth from Trump to Biden. Like, Biden's better than Trump on a bunch of things that I care about. And he's worse on a couple things that I care about too.
Such as?
But that back and forth, that's not getting me anywhere, right? That's just,
right.
What am I mad about this year? Like, is it the guns this year or is it the taxes this year? Like, I'm mad about something. They're doing something I don't like. It's just, what's the thing? You know, that's the problem with being a libertarian. It's great and it's awesome, but it's also terrible because there's always something.
Let me share this comment with you, Nick. Take a look at that. Can you see that?
Yep. Approval voting is a very helpful way for people to express more of their preferences, right? It's more of a signal. So if you look at voting is like an economics. It's like price signals, right? The candy bar that you buy at the grocery store tells everybody, if enough of us do it, that they should make more of that candy bar and less of the other candy bar. And none of our individual votes really matter, but together they all matter and they send real information. When you have first past the post, which is what we have now, you vote for whoever is your favorite. But then if that person doesn't win, your vote is gone, right? You voted and you didn't win. With approval voting, what you do is you're like, hey, here's the 2 out of the 3 people who are running that I'm cool with. And then there's the person I'm not cool with. So I don't vote for the person I'm not cool with. I vote for the 2 people I'm cool with. And if either one of them win, I'm okay. Right. And so it's more of a way to get a broader consensus. And it can have some benefit for Libertarian or Green Party or other independent candidates that are outside the box, because people go, yeah, well, that guy's cool. You know, I might also vote for the Republican, or I might also vote for the Democrat, but that guy's kind of cool too. And so you have that potential for somebody to break out by being popular with a lot of people. That's how Gary Johnson won in New Mexico, Weld in Massachusetts, both Republicans who won in Democratic states. It's by being acceptable to the people from the other side, right? You're everybody's second choice. That's what lets you be the first choice.
I was going to bring this up, but looks like Jan Wilson brought it up as well.
So ranked choice is different. So approval is everybody I like, right? So I like these 3 people and they're not weighted. It's just those are all people that get 1 vote from me, so to speak. Ranked choice is I like this guy, and then I like that guy, and then I like that lady, right? Like those are the 3 people in order. And so your vote automatically goes to the top unless they get knocked out, and then it comes down. So ranked choice is more information because you're putting them in order. Approval is more consensus based, where it's like everybody I like all these people.
Yep. And I think Andrea pretty much says that. So yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like pizza and wings and probably also cheeseburgers are all okay for dinner. That would be approval voting.
But not salad.
Being like, I definitely want sushi, but if I can't have sushi, then I want pizza. And then we'll get wings if, like, you know, everyone else is being jerks. It's like, that's ranked choice.
Yes. I know there was a push in Aurora for ranked choice voting.
Yeah.
You know, and I knew of approval voting as well, but hadn't studied it as much, but I did understand what it is. And I thought, oh, that could be pretty good too. I mean, I like you 2 people. So let me just vote for you 2 people and, you know, and let's see what happens. But, you know, ranked choice is also the other side of, well, you know, sheesh, I don't like this 3rd guy, but I'm going to vote for her and her. And, you know, so you know what my order is. But I get it. I think there has to be a change in how we vote. So which leads me to real quickly, what is your thoughts on the Electoral College?
It's all about, you know, systems are about what you want to get out of them.
Right.
So the Electoral College gets you a system that is minority centric, right? And minority centric meaning that states that are more rural, that have lower population, get an outside. I mean, I live in one, right? I got to meet all the presidential candidates I wanted to in 2020. Like they were just down the street from me because we vote early. And so there we are.
Yep.
You know, I think Andrew Yang said something like, one of you in this arcade is worth something like 90 Californians, right? Or some ridiculous number. Yeah. So that's one, I mean, that's an advantage of the Electoral College, is it makes the country be less urban. But that's the disadvantage, is it makes the country be less urban, right? Because if you don't have Electoral College, then you're just going to go with population centers, and it's going to be LA, Chicago, and New York are going to tell the rest of us how to live. And that just doesn't jibe well with a lot of people that live in places like Colorado, right? Because even though Colorado and Denver, you know, is getting up there in the top 10, it's different from the rest of the country. And you don't really want New York and LA telling you what to do, right? Like, it's just different. Even if you're, you know, similarly progressive on a lot of issues, that was the thing that I noticed when I moved to Colorado from Maryland. They're both relatively democratic states, but the guns in Colorado, like, that was just a third rail, right? Like, we just don't mess with guns because even the Democrats like our guns out here. So just
that's true.
Right?
That's true.
Like,
it's interesting.
And you just have to learn where the pain points are. But I think if you get rid of the Electoral College, it's easy for a place like Colorado to get run over.
Get swallowed.
Right? Yeah. And so you want to have some sort of minority view. I mean, that's why we have courts, right? Is that it's a counter-majoritarian institution that says, hey, yes, Congress may have screwed up and the president may have screwed up, but we're here to be like, hey, you can't just tell people they can't burn a flag, right? Like,
you get Wyoming. you literally get Wyoming having more electoral power than the District of Columbia.
Yeah.
One is larger than the other, yet Wyoming is exponentially more powerful than the District of Columbia. When you said, you're worth 90 Californians, you're not even worth, one Wyomingian.
Land matters, man. I mean, that's the nature of this country. It's a land-based economy, and I don't know why, but that's why Rhode Island, I mean, sure, it's still technically a state, but I mean, it's not very big. We don't make them that small anymore, right? Like,
well, take a look at Andrea's comment again, and she says, "I think it's misguided to believe that people in rural and red states don't want the same thing as urban voters. Poor people in every zip code want the same things."
That's not true. Because if you live in a city, there's network effects that are created by having large amounts of people in one organization or one group. It's the same reason that you have a very large HR and administrative apparatus in a large company, but you don't have that in a small business, right? There's just numbers of people. Eventually you have services and network effects that create more overhead, right? So urban versus rural really does create a divide in what kind of infrastructure people want, right? Transit becomes something that's a lot more interesting to people that live close together. You have a lot more interest in service industries, whereas rural voters are a lot more, they need mobility, they need highways, they need cars. Like, there are shifts. Yes, poor people, I mean, if you're houseless, you need a house, right? Like, that doesn't matter where you live. People without homes need homes, but there are some real differences. And gun rights are one of them. People get less interested in strong gun rights as they live closer together with other people.
Right.
That tends to be how it goes.
Interesting.
There's this sense of, if you're too tightly packed, one person, the friction. Yeah, it's a friction thing, right? Which is why courtesy, if you read Drucker, he talks about, like, the one thing in a nonprofit organization you can't tolerate is discourtesy, because courtesy is the lubrication that allows a machine to move without burning people up, right? And so if people get to be jerks to each other, that friction creates bad feelings, and those bad feelings create bad outcomes in an organization. And so I think that courtesy and consideration are the thing that we need to bring back into politics, but more so just back into life, right? Like, being gracious to people, especially post-COVID. You all have friends on your list who have done some really terrible things this last year and said some things and believe some things that are probably embarrassing or unpleasant to even deal with. And those are still good people, right? And we need to let them come back into the light and let them come back to being in the good graces of everybody else. Because a lot of people went a little crazy last year.
Post-COVID or post-Trump?
Both. I mean, it's the same kind of craziness. People go into a dark place because they're afraid.
Yeah.
And you can't get them out of the dark place by fighting them because they're afraid, right? So they go farther into it. You just have to let your light shine a little bit and try to, bite your tongue a little bit about, I told you so, and just say, hey, it's good to see you back, right? It's good to see that you decided to go get the vaccine, right? Like, that's nice. But don't make a big deal of it. Don't try and dunk on them, because, you got to give people a way down, right? That's something I learned when I was a public defender, is the prosecutors would get really tight into their view of the case. And you had to give them a face-saving way to let your client have the thing that made sense, but give a way for it to make sense to them too, right? Give them something. You didn't need to be the smart guy. You just need to be the guy who...
It is allowing them to make the right decision after you explain to them what the right decision was. Oh, but it's their idea.
Helping them see it from the direction that they didn't see it at the first place. Mm-hmm. And that was why we had the miscommunication, was they just were looking at it wrong. And then obviously, my fault, probably.
And then thanking them for seeing it so clearly. Thank you.
Right.
So we are at the end. I wanted you, Nick, to take a look at this last comment from Andrea.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
So, land and rural issues and agricultural issues are too big to get into. I mean, it's really...
It is.
Voters
30 seconds.
Like prison voters, right? Like, so if you have a large penitentiary in a district, those voters count for electoral and representative purposes for the politicians, but most of them are disenfranchised during the period of their sentence. And so they're not able to be represented. They just provide power to the politician who represents the district. And so you get these weird incentives where the congressman and many of his constituents are all like in the prison industrial complex, have some very specific views on criminal justice that may be out of step with many of the people who live in the district, some of whom live there involuntarily and to some extent. And so that's the thing with rural voters, is that sometimes you get ranchers or people who are in agriculture where the voter isn't really getting what they want. Right. They're more of a cog or part of the feedstock of this larger agribusiness thing that works hand in hand with the government. Like, watch the Farm Bill some year and just watch how, in a town they can't get anything done together. Oh, that Farm Bill, that skates right through. Lickety split, because everybody gets something.
Well, Nick, I appreciate you for being on the show. I hope that you would be willing to come back again. I was going to let Carter have the last word to you. Go for it.
No, just awesome. Thank you, Rockstar. Briefly, are you planning on running anything? I don't want to be that guy, but if you're not,
so I don't know. I don't know right now. I'm trying to focus more on Libertarian Policy Institute and trying to focus on providing some solutions to some of these policy problems that are not so much partisan, right? Like, the policies are libertarian, but it's really any politician, whether it be Democratic, Republican, whatever. If you want there to be more persuasion in the system and less coercion, more of, hey, here's something you ought to do, and less, here's what the government says you have to do, we're looking at solutions to try and solve the problems we have, like the criminal justice issue, like, officer-involved shootings, like higher education, in ways that actually benefit everybody and don't require there to be more government. So that's where my focus is right now, but who knows, 2022 and 2024 are
right
far away.
All right, cool. Nick, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're about to have a state representative, Mike Wiseman, come on. He's going to talk about our felony murder rule, and he's also going to talk about some gerrymandering as well. So we'll
Dan Wilson, stand by. We'll ask your questions.
Gracias.
We'll see you soon. Thanks. All right.
Dan Wilson has a question for Mike Weissman. Her question would be good to ask in this next segment.
Oh, yeah. And I was going to bring Omar on. I don't know where Omar went, but everyone, here we go. Here's another member of the family, Mr. Omar Montgomery. So everyone, thank you all for hanging out with us. We are going to have a little special segment today. We are bringing on Representative Mike Wiseman. And obviously want to thank our brother Omar for being on the show as well. How you doing, my brother?
Hey, I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day. Got a little busy. I really wanted to be on that first segment, but I couldn't get back in time. But it sounded like it was a good segment.
Oh, it was a good segment, and definitely was not like Thursday, but it was a good segment.
Thursday just got a little interesting. That's all.
Yeah, that it did.
Very interesting.
So without further ado, I'm gonna bring on Representative Mike Wiseman. He is my representative. Actually, he's me, Stefania's, and Carter's, right? Omar, Omar, you not in?
No. Naquita is my rep.
Oh, okay. Well, here we go.
Nikita Ricks.
Yeah. And welcome, Mike. How you doing this evening?
How's everybody doing?
Good. Were you able to catch any of that little segment that we had with Nick?
Just at the very end there, I think I heard a new term that I'm going to have to remember and use: Jerry meandering.
Yes.
I kind of like that one. I hope we don't see too much of it the rest of this year.
Combining it all together. So
yeah, it's pretty well done.
But thank you for being on. So Nick, Nick was a public defender in Arapahoe in the 18th, and he was definitely he was in there. He was in the grind. He was in the trenches fighting that good fight. So and Nick went on to do other fun things. He ran national races or state races, things of that nature. So it was good to have him on the show and talk with him. So. And yeah, that was good. But you probably missed the show Thursday, Mike. I don't know, man. That was probably the most fun show to watch for me.
I enjoyed myself. I don't know about the rest of the
I enjoyed myself.
I don't even remember what time I got out of the Capitol on Thursday. Any day in legislative life feels like a week. Any week feels like a month.
Right.
Ages you about 5 years.
Definitely. So we got you on. So thank you. I know there's a couple things we want to talk about, but and I know there's something that you have brought up as well. But let's talk about the most recent thing, and I'm sure that a couple of us probably may have some questions about it. Right now, we have a bill for the felony murder, basically reducing it from a class 1 felony, which carries, well, it used to be from life to death. Now we got rid of the death penalty. Yep. So we doing big things session wise. So now it's just life to life. And now it was reduced to class 2 felony, which carries 8 to 24 years up to 48.
8 to 28.
Has the governor signed this yet?
No, not yet, actually. So this was kind of the big week on moving felony murder. So it had previously passed through the Senate. This past Monday, again, it feels like quite a while ago. Monday, we had the debate on the House floor on what we call second reading, which is the longer, frankly, the tougher, kind of more fluid debate. Went on for an hour or two. And then we passed it on third reading, which is the final recorded vote on Tuesday. Obviously, we had the votes. It has been enrolled. That is kind of a technical term, which means that the nonpartisan staff who kind of help the mechanics of the legislative process have looked at it. They've made sure there aren't typos and all of this stuff. And it is now waiting for the governor's signature. So from the point that it is officially sent downstairs to him, he has 10 days to sign it. I expect that he will. And at that point, it's done. This work of many years and legislators who preceded me is finally done. And like you said, we've made it an F2 offense instead of an F1. So we have taken the life penalty off the table for felony murder. For other theories of murder 1, like the situation in our city, like the movie theater, like the grocery store up in Boulder, that's still there. Obviously, that's not what felony murder is about. But critically, we get this outlier in our law out of first degree and put it in second degree.
And this one has a specific component in it for people who are not the perpetrator. Explain that part of it to us.
Yeah, thank you. This is the whole key. So felony murder is a legal theory, if you will, that according to some research I did, I mean, it goes back to the 1200s or the 1300s. You know, if what we think of for murder culpability is intent and deliberation, and you go in commonly anymore with a firearm, and the prosecution proves all of that. That's what we think about, but that's not what felony murder is. Felony murder is, you were a participant in some other offense. Robbery is a common one. And look, I mean, there's punishment for that, and I'm prepared to say that there should be. But, you did not intend to take a life. You did not participate necessarily in taking a life. You might have been the driver of a car. I mean, the classic example, this has been in the papers in our state going back many years now. There was a woman named Liesl Alman, who was a young woman at the time, maybe 21 or so. She was involved in a robbery. She had been apprehended already. She was cuffed and in the back of a squad car. She was not doing anything to anybody anymore. Her co-venturer had a weapon. He killed somebody. I don't know what became of him, but having already been detained and cuffed and in the back of a squad car, she was charged on felony murder, and she was sentenced to life. Now, something like 7-8 years after that happened, the matter went to the state Supreme Court, was actually tossed out on a jury instruction issue. So it didn't really get to the guts of the felony murder charge, but that is kind of a classic example of how that charge can be applied in a way that really isn't fair. I mean, if you go on the street, I said this on the floor, you walk down the 16th Street Mall in Denver, you walk down Colfax Ave in Aurora, you walk down Main Street in your district, you ask somebody if it's proven beyond a reasonable doubt that somebody intentionally and after deliberation took a human life, should they maybe do life in prison? A lot of people would say yes. If you were to say to people, is it right, is it just that you could do life in prison, no possibility of parole, when it's not proven that you killed anybody or even that you intended to or that you wanted to? I think a lot of people would say that no, that is not right and just, and that's the premise of the bill.
Wow. Anybody's gonna let y'all jump in.
And once again, Mike is my member of the House. What I would say is, what do you say to the pushback of, and then you get it all the time. Well, if they weren't doing anything wrong, then they wouldn't be in that situation anyway. Even as the understanding the nature of the felony murder statute, well, if they weren't doing anything wrong, or if they weren't part of the situation, would the situation even happen? What do you say to those people?
Yeah, look, that's something that I talked about a lot in committee and on the floor. The premise of felony murder, going back centuries, this dates to before we were all born. This dates to before Colorado was a state. This dates to before we were a country. The premise is that there are certain things that somebody might do, robbery, arson, kidnap, that are uncommonly dangerous, that are an uncommonly great harm and wrong to society. And therefore that if death ensues, there should be a heightened penalty. That's the basic premise. So a few things. We call those predicate offenses. The way that those are sentenced in Colorado, there can be decades for those offenses. I mean, already existing law, the bill that we did not change this. If you kidnap somebody and they die because you kidnapped them, you're already looking at felony 1, and we're not changing that. You can do 32 years on an F3 COV, which is some of these things. You can do 48 years on an F2 COV. An interesting point was one of the opposition witnesses, who was a district attorney, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, basically said that, there should be heightened punishment for a death that results from one of these predicate offenses, because the risk of death is so high. The risk of death is nearly certain. And if you look at the way that the second degree statute is written, that's basically what he's talking about. What second degree homicide says is a knowing but not a specific mental state. There is not deliberation proven, and there is not intent to end the life of somebody in particular. What the second degree statute says is you did something that was so gravely dangerous that you should have known to almost a certainty that it was going to cost somebody their life. And you can read the case notes in that statute, and the law says that is second degree, that is 16 to 48 years at the discretion of the judge. What we just described is felony murder. That 16 to 48, not life. I thought that was really interesting how that all came together. Now that's just me. Obviously, there's people out there that say that there should be life without parole for this, but we look at what just happened in Boulder. We look at what happened in our city in 2012. I mean, if we're going to send people away for the rest of forever, it's those things. It's not the fact patterns that we see. I think we touched on this last time. I'm going to see if I can get the notes out from the bill in front of me. You guys know that whenever there's a bill, the nonpartisan staff does what's called a fiscal note. I'll see if I can drop the link in the chat there. It is, it's an analysis by nonpartisan staff that don't work for any party. They work for the legislature. They sort of work for the people. And they did some digging, and they showed the data on the racial disparity of the application of felony murder in recent years. Here we go. So it's on page 2. They looked at 3 years, fiscal 18 to fiscal 20, 42 individuals convicted and sentenced, and then 22 were Anglo, 11 were African American, and they go on from there. So in a state where a couple of percent of our population is African American, more than 25% of people being sentenced on felony murder are African American. That tells you something, and there's actually worse data than that. Some attorneys associated with the Sam Carey Association and with CCDB did some research, and they have vastly more damning data than that.
It's out there, and you're right though. Second degree is knowing. And that's the thing. Every crime does not have a certainty of death, and I think that's the issue that I had with it. Armed robbery does not necessarily have a certainty of death. Burglary, first degree burglary, it does not have a certainty of death. Generally, armed robbery and burglary, they're just trying to get their stuff, get their stuff and leave. They're really not trying to murder. And I say that just from the number of cases that I've dealt with over the years. But there's a probability that it could be, especially if you have a gun, loaded weapon, or you have a knife, something to that effect. That's a high probability in that aspect. But yeah, go ahead. I know Omar or Carter. Yeah.
I think Stefania had a question before.
Go ahead, Stefania, sorry.
No, I just wanted to, when people think of felony murder, they think of the underlying felony and that they're thinking of one person, committing the crime at a time. And the way that felony murder has been used, especially here in recent times and by one specific county, Arapahoe County, has been used as a weapon. Especially when you think about the cases that we've seen. Carter and Marcus, you both have talked about cases where you're defending people who were not the one who took the life. So I know of a specific case where there was a young man who loaned his keys to his roommate, which he had done so many times in the past. His roommate went to somebody's house, robbed them of their some of their items, beat the homeowner up, and killed the homeowner. Now, the person who lent his keys is doing life in prison without parole because they said without the keys, this young man would not have gone over there. That's the type of felony murder that we're taking out of the hands of district attorneys. That is not a tool, that is a weapon. And that is being abused. And so when we talk about changing the felony murder statute, that is the type of person that does not need to see life without parole. He lent his keys to his roommate. That is somebody who has 6 degrees of separation from that crime, but was caught up in the felony murder law as it was written. This now changes that.
Omar,
Yeah. First of all, State Rep Wiseman, I want to thank you for all the work you do with the NAACP, always keeping us updated, always showing up, and thank you for the work you're doing as a state rep. The concern I have when we talk about felony murder, when we begin to talk about age, 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds that's being charged as adults, and some of them didn't know that their friends who brain is not fully developed because they're teenagers as well, making these mistakes, yes, costly mistakes because somebody's life was taken. But if you was just standing there, if you just happen to be around and you end up getting life, the impact of that on the family and the community is devastating. So what do we need to do to get the governor to sign this bill? Do we need to send him letters? Do we need to send him some chocolates? What do we need to do to get the governor to sign this bill?
Thank you. And Omar, I one of the reasons I want COVID to wrap up is so we can get back to doing our meetings in person. It's been too long. But thank you for that. I just dropped a link here, and Marquez and Michael, maybe you can share that. This aspect of felony murder disproportionately being used against juveniles or young adults I think that's a known thing. It's been reported on. In my research, I found some articles that the Denver Post did as far back as 2006. Actually, they were reporting on that sort of unjust combination. No, that was before Miller v. Alabama. That was before juvenile LWOP was ruled unconstitutional under the Eighth Amendment. So, we had people going back years and decades who were sent inside for life without the possibility of parole as juveniles. And things have happened since then, by which the state has had to come into conformity with Miller and the follow-on case, Montgomery. Anyway, look, I expect the governor will sign this. I mean, believe it or not, as controversial a subject as this can be, we had Republican support in the state Senate. We had Senator John Cook, conservative Republican, former sheriff of Weld County, support the bill. We had Kevin Priola, moderate Republican out of Adams County, support the bill. The most perhaps surprising and gratifying was Senate Republican Minority Leader Chris Holbert out of Douglas County, support the bill. Americans for Prosperity, which is the conservative organization, supports the bill. They emailed members about it. I talked to them about it. I actually had a bit of a conversation with Senator Holbert on it, and he's, what he said to me, paraphrasing, was, look, this is not a bill about being quote unquote soft on crime. This bill is about the truth. If you killed somebody and if that's proven, then you should answer for that. And if you didn't, then you shouldn't. I admire that. That was a tough stand for him to take, and he took it. So we had 22 votes out of the state Senate. Unfortunately, I did not convince any of my Republican colleagues in the House, but I certainly tried. So, I think the record is there. I think this is really a pretty sensible solution. I have every confidence that the governor will sign it. I know if you go to the governor's webpage on colorado.gov, there's going to be some kind of contact form there, and it's always fair game to reach out to the governor and for anybody to let him know, what they think the state needs. So he's got a 10-day period that runs from formally when the bill is delivered down there. I don't know exactly what day that's going to be, but could be as soon as this coming week. I hope it is, that the bill is signed and becomes law.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to that day, going to court and watching teenagers being sent up to life. And, and once again, no offense to anyone, but juries are sometimes not made up of the community. Is made up of people of sometimes who make assumptions about the way a person look or their race. So let me ask you this question. Can that bill, once it's signed, for people who are currently about to be sentenced, can it go back and apply to them? What is there anything being discussed on that level?
Great question. And I want to get back to your point about the role of juries too. Unfortunately, no. The bill is prospective, as bills like this tend to be. So essentially, it will, once signed, it will take effect. September 15 of this year, and basically applies to matters that are sentenced after the fact. So where somebody is already inside on a felony murder count, this bill is not able to impact that. Where there is a matter ongoing, and I know that these are happening in the 18th, and they may be happening in other districts. Those are going to be sentenced under the law that was in effect when the charge was filed, and that is what tends to happen in criminal matters. In the past, we actually have people inside on life with the possibility of parole. We haven't had that law on the books in Colorado for more than 30 years, but the reason is we used to. And they were sentenced when there was LWP before we had LWOP. I'll say one thing about that, and let's get to juries. The Constitution of Colorado, and I think that we would find something like this in most states because it goes, we were talking about things that go back to before this country. I think this goes back to before this country. It goes back to common law, and that's the power of gubernatorial clemency. Before this bill, frankly, before any bill, the governor has the power under Article 4 of our state constitution to grant clemency in criminal matters. Now, that can be partial or it can be full. We saw, for example, after the death penalty was repealed, the governor conformed the sentences of the individuals on death row to what was the then law going forward, life. So the governor has the power to basically end somebody's time, or he can say, okay, instead of doing 300 years, you have to do 50, or that's just an example. Again, that's independent of this bill. That power is not used very much. There is the Executive Clemency Board that reviews the matters that are filed with the governor's office and makes recommendations. Last I knew, Hassan Latif, who I think we all know is on that board. I appreciate the perspective that he's able to bring to those kind of things. So in short, the bill is going forward only, which is a big change, but it does not impact, people already inside. To the point about juries, in the years that I've spent working on this issue, I've thought a lot about the defense side. I've heard from a lot of defense attorneys. I've also heard from prosecutors, and we heard from people who are family members of individuals who were murdered or otherwise suffered horrible things. And, I got to tell you, Monday was a really tough day doing this bill on the floor. But I have to be honest that until more recently, until it was earlier this year, I had not really inhabited the perspective of a juror in one of these trials. And what happened is a colleague of mine heard from a constituent in his district who had been a juror on a homicide trial where there were felony murder counts. There's been some press about this. She testified in the Senate. She testified in the House. Horrible situation. What happened is there was a man and a woman. They broke into a lady's house. They kind of hid out. They were trying to rob her. They killed her. The man was able to take a plea deal. He, I think, is going to be doing 68 years. The woman was not offered a plea deal that her counsel were willing to accept, so they went to trial. She was acquitted on M1 charges other than felony murder. Apparently the judgment of the jury was that on the facts, they kind of were boxed into convicting on the felony murder count because, again, mental state doesn't have to be there, intent doesn't have to be there. It's just looking at the predicate offense facts. So the jury, having found those facts, now it's out of their hands. Now the judge has to enter the sentence for life. And, reporting has come to show that this woman has a horrible history of abuse, was abused as a young woman, was abused by her husband. I think a lot of people would have looked at this and said, notwithstanding how it actually went down, hey, the guy involved was the more culpable of the two. But what happened is the opposite. The guy might walk free someday. Who knows? Depends on her time and whatever. But she will not. She's doing life. And in a situation like that, with a life sentence, the jury doesn't really get to consider mitigating factors. The judge doesn't even get to consider mitigating factors.
Yeah.
This law, as it is written until 124 comes along, ties the hands of the jury, ties the hands of the judge. which is part of why, frankly, Americans for Prosperity was willing to support the change, because essentially, and when you look at it that way, the felony murder law is an example of mandatory sentencing.
Yep.
And
Exactly what it is.
you know,
Exactly what it is.
Americans for Prosperity has actually written amicus briefs to federal courts of appeals arguing against mandatory sentencing in the federal system. So it was kind of an extension of that philosophical opposition to that kind of sentencing for them to support this bill.
Well, I mean, that's exactly what it is. It is mandatory sentencing. It is. I want to touch on something. We had another guest on before, and he kind of went over the district attorney's office and habitual criminal acts, and what we kind of touched on and kind of hit with the Stefania and Marcus was that I think we kind of said it's a tool in the toolbox that we are now taking out of the toolbox. So that I just want to make sure it's a very nuanced argument. I just want to make sure it's clear. There's still second degree murder. We're just taking, this bill is just taking that tool, that felony, that F1 out of the toolbox. You want to convict this individual for what they did, the DA, district attorney, still has the ability to do that. This doesn't stop that. It just stops making people culpable for another person's act.
Yeah.
There are still, I mean, for people who have done the hideous things, for people who are a threat to public safety, who have transgressed the morals of society, all the tools are still there, frankly. So felony murder, until the bill is codified at 18.3.102(1)(b). So sub A of that is intent and deliberation. That's unchanged. Sub D is what we call extreme indifference murder. You look at the data, you actually see that going back over the course of 5, 10, 15 years, we're actually seeing an uptick in the charging of extreme indifference murder.
Oh,
yes. Separate conversation. You look at, I hate to use this example. I'm conflicted about even saying the name, but you look at James Holmes. What happened there was one count of intent and deliberation and one count of extreme indifference for each person who died in the movie theater that night. The tools are still there to deal with the person who does that kind of hideous thing. You look at what happened up in Boulder, and I contacted the Judicial Department and I asked them to get me this information to confirm. You look at what the charges that were brought against that shooter, you look at the warrant, you look at the information. 102(1)(a), intent and deliberation, one count per victim. The tools are still there. We've talked about complicity theory. You still have that. And
it needs to go, by the way.
even under the bill, you have second degree. You have 48 years. You have all of the predicate offenses. And again, depending on what that is, I mean, again, you kidnap somebody and they die from the kidnapping. That's already F1. That's already life. We don't even need to bring in a separate homicide count. Apart from that, depending on the facts, you've got everything from lower level felonies to upper level felonies. You've got judicial discretion for consecutive sentencing. You might have mandatory consecutive sentencing depending on the facts. There are lots of tools in the toolbox.
What I'll say, I'm just adding real quick. Jurors do not know. and by the nature of the way jury trials work, they are not told that this atom bomb, this end is part of what they're deciding. They don't know, and we're not allowed to tell them. And obviously they're not supposed to do their own research. That look, as you're going down level of culpability, it's this much, but it's still, the end game is still this individual's going to jail for life.
Yep. That was exactly the issue up in the Eagle County. I believe it was the 5th district. The jury is sitting there. They're trying to decide the facts. They are given the instructions that they are given, and they come back, and then boom, life. And left to their own discretion. But obviously, that's not the way the system works. Look, I mean, this lady was some part of a killing. I think that there would have been a sentence of probably decades, but you had, honestly, I've never seen anything like this before, where somebody who is a juror in a trial of that magnitude is so bothered by the role that she was forced to play by the nature of the law that she goes public with that and comes to the legislature and testifies on the record twice, both committees, both chambers. It's pretty extraordinary.
Mike, I just want to add that I still personally think that we need to figure out how to bring more diversity within juries. That's just me personally. But I want to bring up something else related to the criminal justice system when it comes to the sentencing part. We just had a judge in Judicial District 18 that used the N-word.
Yep.
What power does the state or the DA have to look at that judge sentencing record to see if there are any disparities based on the ideology that this judge has or the bias that this judge has, bringing it to, when it comes to sentencing? When you use the N-word, that says something about you. Yep. That says something about your personality. That says something about your perception about particular races. Is there any power that the state has or the state attorney general has to look at this judge record to see if there are disparities within her sentencing?
Great question. Yeah, I saw that last night. It's pretty sickening. I mean, I think resignation and taking the robe off and getting out of there is the only right answer in this situation. As to a power that the DA might have and the AG, I don't know that there is one, at least off the top of my head. But here is the power that there is. So we have the Judicial Performance Commission. They look at a number of factors, and these are the folks who review survey input from attorneys, from non-attorneys, and they prepare. We see it in the sort of an online booklet now. But when we see judges up for retention and they get we used to call it retain, do not retain. Now we call it meets performance standard, does not meet performance standard. These are the commissions, and there's one in every district, and there's a statewide one that does the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. They chew on, I'll just call it feedback. And they're the ones that put forward the narrative that we see in the booklets and the recommendations. And I think we see that those are followed a lot of the time. Now, I think all of us have been seeing the stuff going on at the state court administrator's office and allegations of some grotesquely improper things that have tended to be about gender more so than race. But that's got me thinking about a lot of things. We could have a whole separate hour conversation about that. But I think one of the things there is the performance commissions need to be able to hear more about how judges handle issues of sex or gender and other things, and obviously race. I mean, we think about judges in that context as these detached, neutral people kind of floating up in the sky wearing a black robe saying what the law is. That's what we all learn in school. What this whole experience with the state court administrator's office teaches us is that judges are also bosses. Judges are employers. Judges are people around whom an organizational culture exists. They have clerks. There are other employees. There are bailiffs. There are court reporters. There are attorneys coming in and out. A judge is a powerful person in our society. There are power disparities in there. So when there are inappropriate things said as to race, as to gender, as to orientation, as to disability, as to a lot of other things, that matters, and that needs to come to the attention of the the performance commissions, rather. Frankly, since I mentioned nominating commissions, now these are constitutionalized, so they can be a little bit harder to change, but frankly, we got to trap these problems upstream. In terms of what names are reviewed by the nominating commissions and put forward to ultimately be named by the governor and then subject to retention. With the exception of county court judges in the rural counties of our state, judges are attorneys, right? So they're subject to attorney discipline. They're subject to the Attorney Regulation Council. And if there's something going on where an attorney did or said things that show bias about race, bias about gender, bias about orientation, bias about ability, background, language, nationality, whatever, then that needs to be known too. Frankly, I think we've got some work to do in all that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So
go ahead.
No. You good, Stefan? You go.
No, I just wanted to bring back into focus what Omar and what Michael Carter were talking about, and that's juvenile offenders and the weapon that is how we weaponize, or felony murder was weaponized. And I want to see if our viewers can understand that when a juvenile is looking at somebody telling them that they're going to spend the rest of their life in jail, their natural life in jail without parole, when they're threatened with that, they will make statements against their own interest. Mm-hmm. And that weapon, I'm so thankful, Rep. Weissman, that you've taken that weapon out of the toolbox of the prosecution, who have said, and I just quoted on our last show, George Brockler stated that was a tool that they needed, right. That tool that they must have, and taking that tool away from them. If it's in there, they'll use it. Yes. And which they have used it. And can you imagine being 16, 17? Our youngest felony murder lifer was 15 years old, mm-hmm. and threatened with felony murder. And I'm sure it was a group of them, and others were threatened with felony murder as well. And so they'll make statements against their better interest, against other people in their party for their own good. And so taking this tool out of the toolbox, I thank you so much. So you've done a lot of hard work. And like you said, for the people that came before you that tried to get this done years and years and years ago, and we've gotten it done. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. And you're touching on the second big part of this. I mean, and frankly, the one that's more subtle and the one that you really gotta be able to see the guts of how the criminal legal system operates to appreciate. The first thing is the obvious one that we've been talking about. When there is a conviction, what sentence happens? Mm-hmm. Is it life or 16 to 48? But this is the second part. And you look at the data, you look at the fiscal note that we were referring to, and I saw the link is in there. There's many dozens of felony murder convictions that actually get entered. But there's got to be a big multiple of that in terms of the times when the charge is threatened, like you're saying, when it is used as a quote unquote tool. And I mean, I know other people may differ, but I don't think that's why the criminal law exists. The criminal law is not there to have coercive discussions in a plea context. The criminal law is there to mete out a consequence that is proportionate to the nature of the offense done. And I don't know that we would ever get data about this, but we brought up habitual a minute ago. Maybe we'll turn to that. But when you see things like felony murder, when you see things like mandatory quadruple top of the presumptive range, which is what the big habitual statute is, you have these things coming into plea conversations. And look, I mean, 95% of things plead out. It's the reality of the system. And if it is a fair plea, if it is a plea that results in a sentence that is commensurate with the harm done, well, then okay. But where you have these weights on the scale, then you have the risk of unfair, unjust pleas. And that is a second powerful reason why I think it was important to do this bill.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you.
What I wanted, there was another piece of that nuanced argument. It's the juvenile portion of it, mm-hmm. where in which a juvenile is given a hearing to see if they can then be tried as an adult, to see if they can then touch that third rail of felony murder. Mm-hmm. And so we're talking 16. I don't know the one that Stefania referred to, but a 16 or 17-year-old, doing a reverse transfer hearing. So mm-hmm. then the DA can now hit him with that third rail of felony murder. And when you're discussing, I mean, think of it as a 16, 17-year-old, and you're trying to have a conversation about, the difference between 48 years and life to a 16 or 17-year-old, there is no difference. So any plea offer / negotiation, there's no difference to a 16 or 17-year-old who may has now aged into past 18, but still, when the crime was committed, was a child. When you come to them with a 10-year offer or a 20-year offer, there's no difference than you come to them with a life offer. It's the same number in a 16 or 17-year-old's head. So that's one of the reasons that it needs to be, one, stop doing all these reverse transfer hearings and turning. There's a reason we have a juvenile system. Yep. Stop turning these juveniles into adults and then sending them to jail for life.
Yes.
And those transfer hearings very rarely won.
Yeah, the percentages of being successful as a defense attorney on that are slim to none.
Yeah.
But here's the other part that gets me. I'm thankful for this law, but it doesn't go far enough. But we've talked about that, Mike, a little bit. We know how hard it is to move the needle on these things. But the thing about it is that the ability to charge as much as you want with the way our laws are, if it's a crime of violence, you can still get to life essentially by stacking, making charges consecutive to one another, by charging that person with 3 charges of the same thing essentially. There's so many ways to get it. I'll never forget a case I had. Young man, he was in custody. Carter knows him. He gets out. Unfortunately, he uses a weapon. He doesn't kill anybody or hit anybody, but his habitual sentencing, if you would have, no, that wasn't habitual. It was just stacked. I think it was 106 years.
Wow.
And he was 19 at the time of the trial, but I think he was, I don't know, 17, 16, maybe 18 at the time, 17 at the time when he committed it. 106 years. So they still got to life, without the felony murder rule. But this was, I don't know.
That's specifically talking to a child,
Yes.
I want to call him a child, 18, 19-year-old, talking to a child. And when the DA's coming and saying something along the lines, okay, well, 20 years. And I remember having a conversation.
31 years.
And he's looking at you like, what's the difference? At that age, what's the difference between 31 and life? Nothing. To a child, there's no difference. It's the same thing to them.
Let's maybe kind of open up the conversation here, and I'm going to drop another link in that you can share here. There's life, and then there's de facto life, and what you're saying is an example of de facto life. Just to talk about habitual for a minute, and then go from there. At least in my mind, growing up in the 80s and 90s, the what happened in California with their so-called 3 strikes law, that's kind of like the classic example where it is true going away for life on your 3rd time or something like that. We don't have that per se in Colorado, but when you are talking triple the top of the presumptive, which is little habitual, not judicial discretion to triple, mandatory triple, or for the big habitual, quadruple the top of the presumptive range. That if you're starting at F28 to 24 and you quadruple that, now you got 96 years. That's de facto life for almost anybody. There was, you don't often see a specific statute called out in the Denver Post, and less often than that do you see the ed board of the Denver Post, or any paper for that matter, this just happened to be the Denver Post, follow on the reporting with an editorial calling for reform. But a couple of years back, this was either 16 or 17, I think, there was a guy that was caught bouncing checks. He bounced maybe $8,800 in checks. Now that's a crime and somebody should be punished for it. I think that we would all say that. But he was charged up on the big habitual, and he was sentenced to 96 years for check fraud. All right, there should be some penalty for check fraud. It's not okay. 96 years de facto life. I think that we would say that's disproportionate. The Denver Post agreed that was disproportionate. Now, in that case, I believe that there was some kind of relief in the form of a 35C motion. But the point is,
it's a proportionality review too. But yeah.
So I mean, which brings us to Sentencing Reform Task Force, and I see Lucy's comment. I mean, that's basically leverage too. I see you shared the link. So CCJJ, I think we've talked about before, is this group that's been around since 07 or 08. They're pretty broad. Their defense, their prosecution, their victims, their justice system involved people, their cities, their counties, they're the state. It's like 30 folks. And they dig in detail on all things criminal justice. They operate with subcommittees and task forces. What they have going on right now, and actually remind me to share one more thing coming up Tuesday that folks might be interested in. They have something called the Sentencing Reform Task Force. It was convened by the governor going back to last year. Yeah, thanks for sharing the page. They have been meeting since about the fall of last year to do a comprehensive review of sentencing classification and presumptive ranges, basically, for just about everything that we have in Colorado. This is shaping up to be the biggest reform in, I mean, it could be decades. Now, I'll kind of start with the big stuff first. I not this year, but I hope next year in our 2022 legislative session, we will see proposals on felony classification and felony presumptive ranges. If you compare Colorado's presumptive ranges, so F2 8 to 24, F3 4 to 12, et cetera, and then all of the things that we got about aggravating factors, habitual, consecutive, et cetera, and habitual was specifically called out by the governor to be looked at by the Sentencing Reform Task Force in his letter. That letter might be on the SRTF website somewhere. It's a matter of public record. If you can't find it there, I'll send it and we can share it around. But the habitual statute was specifically acknowledged as something contributing to disparate sentences, and that the SRTF should specifically look at, from memory, extraordinary risk sentencing. It's a statute that provides basically just tacking on years. That was called out in the letter too. So, the hope, the charge is that this task force will look comprehensively at felony classification, what should be a 5 versus a 6, or what should be a MISDO, whatever, and also the presumptive ranges. And I hope that we will see recommendations and that we will pass a bill or maybe a few different bills.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm gonna put up this comment. This was by Jan as well. This was earlier, but yeah, she the whole concept be rethought. Never thought about that.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, that's part of what this is about, and I'm going to try to get another link here right quick. Before I forget, because I know we're running out of time, this coming Tuesday in House Judiciary Committee at 1:30 p.m., I'm going to try to get a link here. We are actually going to get a presentation from the Sentencing Reform Task Force about the first half of their work, the misdemeanor work. There's not a bill yet. There should be a bill, I think, in several more weeks. Frankly, it could run to a couple of hundred pages, because when you're rewriting all things misdemeanor, it's going to take you a little bit of effort to do that. Let me drop the link in here. Now, this, just like every other committee hearing, this is public. You don't have to come down to the Capitol to hear it. There's going to be a streaming link. We'll have an hour presentation from the co-chairs of the committee talking about what we can expect as far as redoing misdemeanors. This is basically going to be in the vein of moving things around. I mean, right now we have 3 levels of M. I think the proposal is to make it 2. Some misdemeanors will go to a petty offense. Frankly, some things might be decriminalized entirely, like regulatory offenses. Similar approach will be taken next year at the felony level. Here's a good example. This goes back before my time. 10 years ago, you could steal $500 and that would, or $500 worth of stuff, a laptop, a TV, whatever, and that would be F4.
Yep.
Should there be a penalty for theft? Absolutely. Is a felony 4 the right penalty for simple theft? Not using force, not burglary, etc. Maybe not. So what they did back in, I think this was 2013, there was a bill that made theft graduated. So if you steal a little bit, that might be as low as a petty, more as an M. By the time you're stealing $1 million worth of stuff, now that's an F2, because we're talking about a serious offense. That's one example of conforming what is going on to penalty levels. Frankly, another example was SB 13250, which was the rewrite of drug sentencing. Another example building on that was HB 19-1263, which made most drug possession misdemeanor. Now, dealing, distribution, that's still felony. So I think it is appropriate, and I think this is part of what SRTF is going to be doing, is to look at what do we call a misdemeanor, what do we call a felony. Those things mean slightly different, penalties in different states, but the short of it is, in Colorado, felony equals you're going to DOC, misdemeanor equals you're going to county jail. Beyond that, frankly, you're more likely to get a diversionary disposition on a misdemeanor. We know the collateral consequences are much more severe and long-lasting at the felony level. So it absolutely matters what is classified what.
Mike, I just want to say, first of all, I'm not speaking from a perspective of not knowing the victim side of this. I've had friends that was murdered. I've had family members murdered. And trust me, I was enraged. each time those things took place.
Yep.
At the same time, we should only be convicting people to the level they
Yep.
participated in a crime. Number one. Number two, I think that the state should look at something called gap sentencing. For people between the age of 14 and 22, there's a difference if they have an egregious crime that they was a part of. Let's look at a restorative justice model for that age group and not just automatically sending them to life or giving them these long sentences to the point where we disrupt families and disrupt communities, which we've seen time and time again based on these long sentences, especially in communities of color.
Thank you, Omar. I'm glad you brought up the victim perspective. Look, I'm lucky. I've been a victim of only minor crime in my life, simple theft. I was able to fix that pretty quick. Not everybody I know has been so lucky. I know people that have been brutally sexually assaulted, and there was never any justice for them. People were never caught. People were never punished, and boy, should they have been. And look, we all know people in our community that have been murdered, and you've shared your stories in the past, and I can only imagine it. I mean, in my view, it is precisely because things like that happen, because these hideous offenses happen, and there should be severe punishment for those things. You shouldn't steal. We all know that, There should be some penalties for things like that, but there has to be space between that kind of penalty and what happens when you brutally kill somebody, when you brutally rape somebody. These are not the same things. As to sentencing, and we were talking about transfer and reverse transfer earlier, there was direct file reform before my time. You can still direct file 16 and 17-year-olds, and then there's a gigantic difference. If you're looking at juvenile adjudication, that's 2 to 7 years. And then the expungement is a lot more easy to obtain for people who go through juvenile adjudication. The minute that you are direct filed and that sticks, or that you get transferred up, now you're looking at the full range of adult sentencing, maybe for a 16-year-old. And I think we need to kind of revisit that, frankly. To the point about different sentencing for people who are legally adults, 18 plus, but younger, 19, 20, 21, 22, different people would draw the lines at different places. In all of these conversations in criminal justice, we have to balance out, punishment to the individual and sort of expressing, I'll just call it the outrage of society, versus the long term and the other harms that are done. You send somebody away, look, maybe somebody needs to do some penance and punishment, but you're also sending away, a husband or a wife or a father or a mother or a brother or whatnot. And there does need to be cognizance of those things too. You mentioned restorative justice. I'm going to brag on my counterpart, Pete Lee, senator from Colorado Springs, chair of Senate Judiciary. If there is a restorative justice law on the books in Colorado, he probably put it there. He's been working on this for 10 years. And the whole different framework, just to name it, the usual way of looking at things is, how do we punish somebody? And the restorative justice framework, and this has to be voluntary, something isn't restorative justice if we say it is. There's a certain way of doing it right, and there has to be fidelity to that concept. But it is about acknowledging and restoring harm that is done. It is about taking responsibility. It is about the person who did the wrong, who did the crime, feeling that change inside and owning what was done. I think the way that Hassan puts it in his book is own your own crap. You got to do that. And then you can step forward and try to approach the people that you've harmed or their family, if they're willing, and you can apologize. And we heard a couple weeks ago in committee on a different bill, there's a situation where somebody, when he was a young man, did something awful and killed a lady's young son. And then, they got to know each other, and she has now adopted him as her own son.
Wow.
Imagine, it boggles the mind. I mean, talk about
imagine the feeling that took place in that.
Talk about grace, you know. That's not possible every time, but that happened this time. It was, you know, it's been in the Denver Post. It was phenomenally powerful. And again, that won't happen for everybody, but that can happen sometimes. And the law should create space for that to happen, where people are willing for it to happen.
So we are at the end of our time. There's so much to discuss.
There is.
Because I have other questions here, and I really wanted to dive into some more things, but I'm actually really happy that you shared the Sentencing Reform Task Force, because now that I see their meeting dates, although this one for April 20th has been canceled, I'm definitely going to try to see just to appear. These are not public hearing. These are not public meetings where a person can make a comment, are they?
You know, I have to be honest, and I apologize, I should know, but I don't know if they're public in the sense of like a committee hearing where there's a lot of comment, but you know, I'm hoping at least they web stream them. And, you know, they used to meet in person over at the DPS building, you know, in Lakewood. That's been all messed up, you know, like everything else because of COVID. So they're probably meeting virtually like the rest of us are doing. I do see if you go on there, they have a staff member named Damian Angel or Angel who's got an email address on there. I would expect that if you were to send him a comment, let me just put this email in the chat here. If you were to send him a comment and say, hey, you know, please share this with members of the task force, I hope that he would do that. You know, this is a public body. They're created by statute. They are representative in nature, prosecution perspectives, defense perspectives, victim perspectives, system people perspectives, other perspectives. You know, they have to be able to hear from the public, you know, whatever the details are.
Yeah, I agree. There's so much to discuss in this area, and we're only touching the tip. So obviously, Mike, we need to have you back on to continue this discussion. And honestly, I just want to give a quick moment of privilege and give a quick shout out. You know, death penalty gone, felony murder rule. These are things that, quite frankly, I got to be honest, didn't think I'd see. I mean, not while I'm currently practicing and other things, but you know, props to the people, and obviously to the General Assembly just the same. So, yeah,
you know, it's been a pretty significant couple of years. I mean, I think it was, I don't know. I mean, Omar, did you say this at one of our meetings? I forget who said this. Criminal justice without justice is just criminal, you know? When people do wrong, when people do harm, there does have to be consequences, but it has to be proportional. And when we see these grotesque racial disparities in the system, you know, that should tell us that something is wrong. When we see very different outcomes in very different parts of the state, when we see, you know, huge ranges in how many years somebody can do on very similar fact patterns, you know, that should flag for us that we have more work to do.
Yes. I wasn't the person that made that comment, but I agree with it 100%.
Fair enough. Gentlemen, anything else before we go?
Real quick, we posted in the comments the ability to contact the governor directly. The bill will be in the process of being signed this week. So if there's anything we can do, let us know. Thanks again.
Yeah, you know, I'm gonna keep my eye on it. There's not always a signing ceremony for everything. I mean, sometimes, you know, they get a bunch of bills ready, they put them on the governor's desk. He does it. I will keep my eye on this, believe me, and I will let you all know as soon as I see it happen.
All right. Well, everyone, with that, thank you for tuning in. Please continue the discussion in the comments section. And Mike, real quickly, can you put up your contact information should someone want to contact you real quickly?
Yeah, sure. I'll put my direct email in here, and then you can share it, and website too. So that's my best email.
Lucy Martin is hilarious. Let me just share this with you real quickly.
Hold on. Hold on. There we go. Hold on.
Well, yeah, let's talk about the process here. Look, I mean, there's now a vacancy. So what's going to happen is the nominating commission is going to go to work, and they're going to send some names to the governor. And, I think that we know that we have collectively, you look statewide, we have a bench that does not reflect the diversity of who we are as a state. I think the governor has tried to make some strides toward remedying that. I think we have another opportunity to take another stride here, and I hope we see that happen.
Here's a friend of the show too, Nelson. I wonder who he's talking
I've been trying to get him. Yes, he's a member of one of those. He's a member of one of those judicial performance committees.
Yes, he is. Exactly.
Here we go again. Hold on.
So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about. I know a guy that would be a great fit too for that spot, but we'll be talking about that down the line. Everyone, this was a great show. We obviously got to hear a lot of things this evening. Real privileged to be able to have to be able to call on Mike Wiseman to pop on and talk about these things. And so, Mike, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Look, these are great conversations. I appreciate the invite. And, we're still only about halfway through the session. We got a lot of big policy that we're still going to be talking about. I got a record ceiling bill up in committee Tuesday that I've been working on real hard.
Yes.
Real close to me. We could have a whole separate conversation about, we've talked so far about sentencing and what happens when somebody's going into the system.
Mm-hmm.
And, all right, I'll try to not get off on a whole separate hour on this because I could, but next time maybe. Punishment is supposed to be finite. Whether you do probation, whether you do DOC, whether you do 6 months, whether you do 20 years, you did that, and then you're coming back out, and we as society want you to succeed. We want you to get housing and to work to the extent of your ability and to contribute back to society. And to get another chance. That's what collateral consequences and record sealing are about. So actually Tuesday afternoon, 1:30 to 2:30 is going to be that sentencing reform task force. Starting right about 2:30, maybe shortly thereafter, I will be presenting House Bill 1214, which is the record sealing bill. And in the Senate, when I get it over there, it's going to be Senator Lee and Senator Coleman will be doing that bill in the Senate. So hope to make some progress there as well.
So much going on there, y'all. You need to be involved in local and state government. Y'all need to be involved. There's too much going on. That's all I got to say. With that, everyone, Dope Black Thoughts is out. Peace. Have a good night.
What is love? It's a drug. Let it rotate, then get back in it. Calling me an Uber just to get back in it. Use the cash app like fake. I spend